Our next speaker is Andrew Reynolds. He says he spent 30 years in banking, accounting, regulation, education, and now somehow makes a living as a commentator. Brilliant, Andrew. Welcome.
I would like to be making a living as a commentator. I do mostly consulting work now. You'll note also that I'm wearing a pink shirt. That's because I'm an accountant and I'm trying to keep you all awake.
Pinko!
Absolutely. I've been called much worse in my life. When Tim asked me to do this discussion piece, I was initially uncertain about which specific area to talk. I said money and banking almost without thinking, and then I had several misgivings, as the topic seemed to be done to death in the forums. For those of you who have the misfortune to read me on Facebook, or have gone through the 3,000 plus comment threads that we used to have on Catallaxy files when Graham Bird was arguing about monetary policy and with banking, you'd know what I was talking about. I have been arguing about these points, as I said, literally online for years, and the discussion always seems to end up being pretty circular. So I thought I'd at least bring a couple of points to the table for you guys to think about. At least everyone's welcome to my opinion. When talking with economists, the usual discussion about what money is heads off in one of several ways. It's usually treated as unimportant and brushed off with comments that it's either something that fulfills the three functions, medium of exchange, store of value, and as a unit account, or most frequently from econometricians, monetarists, or the Rothbardians, it's certainly one of the monetary aggregates, typically M3. The accountants, and this is going to be fun, there's oddly very few of us on the forums. Perhaps we've got better things to do, or just even bigger introverts than the economists. We'll normally point to the accounting standards and say that, and here I'm going to give you an example of the language of the standards. Welcome to my world. Money is cash or cash equivalents, being cash on hand, demand deposits, and short-term, highly liquid investments that are readily convertible to known amounts of cash and which are subject to an insignificant risk of change in value. This is AASB 107, paragraph 6. Sorry if that was a bit much, but I'll redeem us accountants shortly. Lawyers will normally point to the legal tender laws and say that, under the Reserve Bank 1959, notes are money good for any value, and that, under the Currency Act 1965, coins are usable up to certain values, with the $2 gold, or at least $2 gold coloured coins, being money up to $20. People not in one of these professions will normally say something about notes and coins and perhaps bank deposits. All of these definitions, except perhaps the first, would tend to point to there being an easy way to calculate a single value or stock of money for the economy. The first definition, though, would seem to be useless for any form of calculation, as it doesn't allow any real precision. It could be anything at all, as long as it functions that way. Money, as most textbooks will tell you, has been around for a long time. In promotion of my profession, I would point out that the very first things recorded in writing, those in ancient Sumeria, were accounting records. Writing did not start with the need to record lofty ideals, to recite great poetry, or even to communicate laws. Sorry guys, it started to solve informational issues around the value of crops, the transactions needed to buy and sell livestock, and to organise mining ventures. Coming from WA, I particularly like the last of those. The point is, as Hayek might have put it, that these are all solutions to informational issues. The easiest way to keep track of things to accountants is to reduce them to numbers and then add the numbers up. Using a token to represent those numbers is a logical extension of this. And if it were a physical token, even better, as they can be easily traded and can be the standard against which everything else can be measured. And being an accountant again, I love standards. Once that token becomes a standard within an area, you've got the advent of money. In much of the Middle East, gold, silver or copper became the standard, and so we get the colours of the modern Australian coins, at least until inflation destroyed the value of the copper coins, and our friend Mr. Keating decided to get rid of them years ago. So far, so simple and not controversial. What then is money? My answer, as much as it pains me after long study, is I don't know. I'd also add that anyone else that tells you they do know is, I think, wrong. The lawyers are right to an extent, as the law can force us to accept notes and coins, but this definition omits many of the other things that we frequently use as money. such as in this area of EFT, the contents of our bank accounts. Given the proliferation of accounts though, which ones? Term deposits can be withdrawn at a moment's notice. Credit cards have large spending limits. Bank deposits with other banks, on the other hand, can be left for years without being touched. Which of these do we include or exclude from money? I'd say, for example, that you look at M3, which is the usual one that you hear about. What is and is not just either side of the line of M3? Trying to say that something is money and this other thing is not leads to the errors of the Keynesians, the monetarists, and yes, the Rothbardians, all of whom believe that the solution to economic problems lies in mucking about with the money supply, with the only real difference being what each wants to do with it. The Rothbardians want to set it in stone, the monetarists want to increase it gradually, and the Keynesians, or at least their modern descendants, shouting, "Turn on the printing presses" at the first sign of trouble. All are wrong. Mostly this is because you miss the difference between cash flows and the stock of cash. Part of the problem, and this is addressed to the economists in the room, is that you misunderstand the nature of accounting information. Our information is prepared for accounting reasons, and it's also almost universally misunderstood by you guys. Please, take a few units in accounting and read the standards before you use the information. It might help a little. End of sidebar. Where to then? I want to avoid here being the what I would consider the errors of, well, one of the errors of Marx is that he was a great critic but he wrote terrible prescriptions. As usual, I head straight to Hayek, but even here I would disagree with, at least in part. Hayek, in his denationalisation of money, the argument refined, which is a better one than the previous denationalisation of money, argued that to denationalise money, i.e. to remove the legal tender laws, eliminate central banks, I prefer to say government monopoly central banks, why I'll get to momentarily, and to let citizens decide for themselves what they wish to use for transactions, would end up with a limited number of competing currencies. This, however, ignores the size of the government in any modern economy. As we are talking about reform, I'd like to get on to what I think is an actual realistic, or at least moderately realistic, way forward. While it might be tempting just to wish the government away, yes please, it ain't going to happen anytime soon. So what should our reform agenda be? What I'd say first is that it can't be by introducing any more regulations, please. The banking system is already massively over-regulated. Having worked in the area for as long as I have, the number of regulations is strangling the system. It's led to the current Big Four system being what it is. The more the regulations, the more concentrated and centralised the banking system will get. Secondly, and I've heard this several times over the weekend, not least from one of my fellow panellists. Sorry to do this to you. Secondly, there are many calls to audit the RBA, echoing those of audit the Fed in the US. This is fundamentally misconceived. The RBA is already audited and its performance reviewed ad nauseum. And believe me, sickening is a way of putting it. A purist and correct answer would be to end the RBA, disband APRA and repeal the Banking Act, the Currency Act and many others. Sorry guys. This, however, suffers from two fatal flaws. Banking... I'm talking realistically here, sorry. Banking is an international business, and access to the international banking system is largely contingent on accepting the Basel Accords as issued by the Bank of International Settlements. Without access to the BIS, international capital flows would become generally much more difficult. A second problem is that this would prove enormously unpopular. Any attempt to deregulate banks would be met by an entirely predictable howl from the media and the commentariat, many of whom have made a comfortable living out of using the word bank as a byword for ruthless capitalism. In the short term, I think these two are going to stop any worthwhile reform. The way forward has to be first to make the point over and over again that the banks are actually the most regulated legal businesses in Australia, and that this has created the current situation. Longer term, I believe the intermediate step is a simple but counterintuitive one. Instead of creating less regulators, make more of them. Create what amounts to competition in bank regulation. Those banks that, for some odd reason, choose to be regulated under Rothbardian strictures might choose to be regulated by Rothbardian Regulators Limited, the free bankers by Hayek Deregulators Inc., and the international trading banks by APRA under the Basel strictures. Longer term, these regulators could then form the centre of the private central banks. I've only got another 30 seconds, so I'll continue. Issuing their own currencies or agreeing on a single standard currency, whatever that may be. None of these would be backed by an explicit or implicit government guarantee. Money, at least, would have to be left to the RBA. Political reality is that we are not going to get private currencies anytime soon. Longer term, the Aussie dollar could be linked to, but not necessarily backed by, a commodity or commodities to reduce the capacity of governments to control it. To sum up, money is really a form of information, as Hayek contended, but what is or is not, I would argue, is neither relevant nor knowable. It is a way of measuring what you have to give up in exchange for something else. Trying to accurately measure it is just going to give you a similar response to the quantum effect. Heisenberg lives on, not only in physics, but in economics. The banking system is a mess as it is, but that's not the fault of the banks. The large ones are certainly guilty of rent-seeking, but we should not blame the beneficiary of the rent-seeking. We should be aiming at the creator of that rent-seeking. And the start of a solution is not to get rid of the monopoly regulator, but to get rid of the monopoly of regulators.
Yay.